On December 9th. Good afternoon. We are going to call the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority regular meeting to order on December 9th at 2:01 p.m. Let the record show in the Oregon Commissioners, Commissioner Fox, Babbitts, and Polson are present. Alternates Thomas and Edwards are present. Is Nate online?
Could you do that with a little more motion now?
Yeah. In Washington. Commissioners Anderson, Keithler present. Commissioner Gibson has not joined yet. Alternate Gilchrist is absent. So I see Commissioner Wilson is present and voting at this time, and Commissioner Berger is late. Will be late. There is a quorum. Are there any modifications or additions to the agenda?
Depending on timing, if we have time to move up the risk workshop, Jason has a family commitment at 3:20. So if we start approaching the 3 o'clock time frame, if we can fit into the risk presentation, I'd like.
Why don't we do him at the beginning? Could we do that since we've missed the last meeting?
If everybody's okay with that. He just had a family commitment. I told him I would ask.
Okay. Are you good with that, Co-Chair? All right. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda, changing the presentation risk 101 to after public comment.
I'll make that motion.
Second. Here's the motion in a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We have the approval and correction of the minutes from 2025. Has everyone had a chance to review them? I would entertain a motion.
Move that we approve the regular session minutes as noted.
Second. There is a motion and a second. Any discussion? All the names were right. Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Public comment. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to provide public comment to the Bridge Commission? Is there anyone from the public? Okay, I'm going to close public comment. Next up, we've got a presentation risk 101 from Jason from Krebs Court.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Jason, while you're getting ready, I just wanted to give a quick update. We have a risk workshop that is scheduled for January the 16th. You all should be getting an invite if you haven't already to that. It's going to be a public meeting to go through the risk workshop. We wanted to give you a couple presentations, one at today's meeting and then probably one at the January 13th meeting, just to give the authority some background on what to expect out of that risk workshop. So Jason's going to do the first one of those two. And then based on kind of what questions you guys have out of this presentation, we can address those at the next board meeting with the second presentation. So. All right, Jason.
All right, I'll figure out how to share here. Good afternoon, everyone. So let's see here. One second. Having troubles here, Sharon. Hang on.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
We can.
Are you seeing this screen here?
That's your working screen. Switch to the other
All
one.
right, y'all. Hang on one second. Flop it around here.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. See how much I've used Zoom.
If you go up to the top, when you do that next time, hit display switch screen. You can switch it from the when you're sharing incorrectly, which is no big deal.
Did that work?
No, go to the display settings in the center there. Show taskbar, display settings, and slideshow. Yep, click the, no, don't hit in slideshow, hit display settings, the down caret, press swap.
Hey, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So again, thanks for moving it up. I really appreciate it. My name is Jason Kamezek, Krebs Corporation, assisting with the risk and risk management on this project. So today, Michael requested that I run through kind of a high-level overview of as we get deeper into the cost, the ICE process. We're going to start focusing more and more and more on risk. Right now, we have, if you all aren't familiar with risk on a project, we have a risk register. And very simply, in its simplest form, it tracks as we, I'm listening in on the task force meetings. I'm actually on the estimating side, tracking risk in its simplest form, all the way from, I'll go through some examples here, from a very simple risks all the way to, tracking the cost of those risks we'll be doing after we go through the ICE. The cost estimate here, this first round of it. The risk register, it identifies potential risk issues related to construction work. And they're either categorized as authority, provisional, or design builder risk. Authority risk, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a risk that's borne on the authority. A provisional risk is a risk that's typically identified in the risk register, and it's usually a shared provisional sum. Design builder risk is that it's the contractor, and then a little bit further, a risk to be borne by the authority as specified in the risk register. And in this risk register, we assign responsibility, and I'll show you an example at the end here. I'm sure y'all are familiar with Williams Pipeline and utility agreements. That's just one example. A provisional risk is a risk to be shared. If encountered, one is differing site conditions, regulated site conditions, hazardous substances. And then a design builder risk, again, it's to be borne by the design builder, as specified in the risk register. If they own the design, the example here is, and there's significant quantity growth, they are responsible for that risk. Risk versus contingency. So a risk, the simple definition is it's the probability that the estimate, bid, or execution will increase actual cost to the point where it will erode the design builder margin. So the higher the probability that a risk will occur, the higher the contingency amount carried should be. Fairly simple. It's relative to the computed risk value. Just a few general guidelines, and these aren't precise, but this will help kind of, for those of y'all who aren't too familiar with risk, help you kind of wrap your arms around it. If there's a greater than 75% chance that a risk will occur, we're going to be carrying the 100% of the risk value as cost. And 20% or less, it's usually not a risk, or it's not something that we pay too close attention to. And risks that have 20 to 75% chance should have contingencies applied against them. So I'm not going to take credit for this diagram. Mr. Fox helped us with this. This was I like this. It's super simple, and understanding the three buckets of contingency on a project. So in the middle, you can see there's the contractor and the project, and they have their own design allowance. Working a little bit further out, contingency carried by HNTB is change order contingency and the actual provisional sums that I discussed. And the last layer is the bridge authority and FHWA, also referred to as unallocated contingency. And this is a requirement outside of the risk register. So contingency development, here's some examples. So again, very, very simple, but we're going to start tracking the cost, risk costs and the associated contingency in the log as we get further into developing the cost alongside the design builder. So simple example, risk A, the full value is $1 million. Chance of occurring 75%. So the contingency value is $750,000. Pretty straightforward. And then I like this diagram. It shows kind of on the left, it's starting from the early stages of the project. And the goal you can see working left to right from planning to construction, the known and quantifiable, everything. The goal is to ultimately reduce and pinpoint contingency. This is a screenshot of our risk register, and this is actually from this project. We're well over 100 risks that we've identified throughout the process. It's got, you can see, pick a simple one here. Weather risk number 29, right, left to right. We go in, we categorize it, construction, WBS category. We put more specifics, a description, any additional information we have, and whether it's a risk, which is a threat here, or an opportunity. We track both risks and opportunities. And then the priority, from low all the way to very high. And right now the very highs are, you'll see, you'll see those popped out in meetings as condensed list is the top 10 is what these are. And then we also track, is it a critical path item, a trigger, which is essentially what kicks it off. The responsible or the response, basically mitigation, and then the responsible party and the status. And this response, this is hidden, but this is response mitigation. It's basically what steps are being taken or going to be taken to mitigate the risk. Here's a little bit. This is when you click in on the risk register into each individual risk. Like here's a sample: inadvertent cultural resource discoveries. So this first example, we give it an ID. Earthwork could result in discovery of unexpected protected cultural resources. These situations can result in project shutdowns in the area where resources are found and application of. And so we go through, we put a description in. We talk about we're beginning to start about the cost, qualitative and quantitative, cost, probability. We prioritize it, and then move all the way over to the responsible party. Here you can see is the design builder, and then they're monitoring their control and their plan, like having, response mitigation, having an inadvertent discovery plan in place, and then schedule. And that is it.
So before we get into any questions, the risk register is available on the SharePoint site. All of you have access to it. It's down at the bottom. So you can go into it at any time and click on it and go through what the risks are. So that's always out there and available for you as well. So any questions on this piece?
Just one, just to make sure I understand what I just heard. So the cultural resource example that you used, presumably the risk of that is going to be quite low because we're talking about an area that's been scoured by the river repeatedly. So did that, have we gone through that one yet? And what probability was placed on that?
That's what we're going to do at the risk workshop.
So that hasn't happened yet.
No.
Okay.
So
But if I were to guess that it would be below 25%, if it is below 25%, then the risk value becomes zero on that?
I think it depends on where you're talking.
Yeah.
So like if that particular issue is over on the TFAB site to
What's TFAB?
TFAS, that's
the tree fishing access.
fishing access, from that site over to under the new bridge. If we want to build a road across there for access, there's a whole area there that has not undergone this.
It has to some extent, but I can certainly see a difference, a gradation. But in that case, the value of it would be related to that piece of the project and not to the entire project.
Correct.
So the other thing when you're looking at risk, and I think he did a nice job on this. There's actually two components to risk. One is identifying a risk and what could be the price for its impact. The other piece of it is mitigation. Okay, what are the steps involved in clearing the risk, making it real or not making it real? Now, the reason why I bring that up is that as we go through the estimate, the OPC, that mitigation cost, in my mind, should be in the estimate. The resultant contingency amount would be in the contingency pot. But you want to make sure that your mitigation efforts are in fact funded. Otherwise,
It's cost effective, right?
yes, otherwise you don't know whether it ever got mitigated or it's just hanging out there and it's going to surprise you someday.
And the bonus question is identifying those risks and the mitigation as early as possible, because that's when it's cheapest to mitigate it.
And the key to success is managing that effort to resolve the risk. A lot of projects put it on risk registers and then forget about it. They walk away from it.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Yes.
I have a pretty simple mathematical one, from your slide 6, where you have risk versus contingency. You have on there that everything below 20% risk is basically written off in terms of contingency. On your example, you have an item that's full risk of $800,000. Let's say hypothetically we add a couple of extra zeros to that amount, but the risk is still 15%. Why necessarily would we want to continue to just write that off if hypothetically the risk is still so low, but it's a large ticket item? Would we not want to consider still carrying contingency for that if it is such a big ticket sensitive item?
Yeah, and that's part of the discussion that we'll have at the risk workshop. Is you're right, that if there's a small percentage but a big dollar, it may still be worth tracking or keeping an eye on.
Okay.
Yeah, same difference if you have a very small one, but it's a high potential. Do you really track it if it's a minor impact? So.
Yeah, the way I read this is very gross, general guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to check to make sure.
And those type of items that you're talking about, they'll be brought up. I've seen them before, and from either our ICE team or the design builder. They'll be brought up if there's very large ticket items that yes have a lower risk. There'll be discussions on how to handle them as well.
All right, thanks.
Any further questions? Everybody looking forward to risk 102.
Can't wait.
This was one.
101.
If you would send us any questions you have or things you may want to know about risk, that'll help us put this together instead of guessing at what you want to hear. Rather fill you in on things that you want to hear about.
Isn't it? The whole point of the section is to discuss the specifics, right?
The work session is to go through the specifics. I just want to make sure you guys are comfortable with the terms that'll be used, what the process is, that stuff. The workshop will go through all the specifics of every single risk.
Yeah, I think we've all been in some form of risk analysis. It's just the question of what the specifics are on this project and how people, what likelihood people put behind them. And I'm curious to see how that's done.
That'll all happen at the workshop. So if you don't need a risk 102, you can say that. We don't need any understanding. We just want
risk 102.
just any deeper dive into what goes into the owner's bucket, what goes into the design builder's bucket.
I'll offer something up there. This was written that we have a design build contract in place.
Right.
And the builder part of this thing typically is lump sum. So when you see the contingency buckets there, right now, those buckets don't apply.
Right.
It's all ours.
Right.
We own all of it, all three pieces of it. Once we award a fixed price construction contract, then we shove some of that into their bucket.
I think one thing that would be, that is curious in my mind is how does FHWA relate to, they're gonna participate in this risk workshop? They, like from our initial discussion, they clearly have some ideas about how this works. And what's our goal kind of coming out of that with a FHWA?
We're meeting
based on
with-
what we think.
We're meeting with them on the 6th or 7th, that week of the 6th. I can't remember which day it is now, with FHWA's risk folks to make sure and walk through the agenda of our workshop. To make sure it's covering what they need as well as what we need. So we could brief you on that part of it on the 13th of what came out of that meeting. Prior to the meeting on the 16th.
Yeah, I think it's just the advantage of being everybody doing the same thing, apples and apples, is the upside of that is huge if we can get there.
We didn't want to do two. They at one time had wanted to do two, and we agreed to combine it, and do one, so that the results are a uniform set of results.
Yeah, no, I think that's,
So is anybody thinking we need a 102, or can we skip the 102 and the costs and we can go straight into our risk workshops?
Okay, and we'll just brief you on the meeting with FHWA.
Excellent. And if you guys don't mind, I'd like to take a little bit of executive privilege and push Dan Bates up. He has another conflict, so if we could hear from our Oregon lobbyists. I hope only good news, Dan.
It is very similar news to the last time we all chatted, which is we're in the same place that we have been. We feel good about the atmospherics on how our project is being perceived. The only things that have happened since the last time we all chatted together was more of the work groups have continued to move. You'll recall the Transportation Committee put 3 work groups together. The work group 3, which is the HB 2017 projects, has continued to focus on 2 areas. They have been drilling deeper into some of the finance mechanisms around the big ODOT projects, and they have been talking about overall some of the issues on replacement of funding in the Highway Trust Fund. We continue to be encouraged with our conversations with leadership, with the Transportation Committee leadership, and with staff around our project's relative emphasis within their thinking. There will be, as you all recall, legislative days this week. They start tomorrow. They've actually been shortened, and that's because there's a special session that has been convened in Oregon on Thursday to help pay for the outstanding bills on wildfire reaction costs, which is a very significant number, that to make sure they can get the bills paid before they go into session, are holding a special session and spending some money there. That will take most of Thursday, which actually means a lot of the other work on Thursday got canceled. So Maddie and I will continue to work with soft touches on the different members in the legislature. We are still awaiting the new Transportation Committee assignments, which again will have some shift, but it should largely remain the same. And then we will be planning for a lobby day for the project in late January or very early February as we march through the session. So there is not a whole lot more since the last time I chatted with you all. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, but we remain where we were.
But then you said that you continue to be encouraged. Without revealing sources, can you explain what sort of things or what sort of discussions cause that encouragement, or what sort of murmurs you're hearing? What makes you feel good?
Sure. So I suppose I start with I'm a lobbyist, so I'm constantly paranoid. So my encouragement feels different than the average person. But this is what I would say: when we go and chat with folks who ultimately will be in the room making these decisions, they are very clear that this project is important to happen, that there are a number of different stakeholders that care about this project. We're having to do almost no education with them as to what the project is, what it needs. So that's why I'm encouraged. We're not walking into a meeting where someone is surprised that we're talking to them about a project that needs to be on the list at the highest levels. So that tends to be where we are. I will say the overall dynamics on whether we have a package and how big it is, that remains the same. It's a difficult challenge to get a transportation bill put together, and where, you know, I think I mentioned last time, sometimes it gets harder before it gets easier. And I think on the politics with regard to an overall package, those are difficult and hard. I suppose I am most encouraged about the project's relative notoriety within those people that have to, or notoriety is the wrong word, sort of,
Maybe the right word.
yeah, by those that have to make the decision. So.
And does that include the possibility of not having if they're unsuccessful at transportation package, we have, you know, sort of the plan B or the alternate path. What's your level of, you know, do you have the same, I forget the word you used, but the same encouragement? Do you feel the same encouragement on that?
Not, I don't think it's as well developed. I think folks understand that they do not want this project to stop, and that some level of funding would be required to continue in the session, even if there's not a transportation bill. I think they do not want to give them themselves the room to fail. So there isn't a whole lot of speculation on that point. I think there is a fundamental understanding that the project must continue, and that translates to even if there's not a transportation package, what that actually looks like. No one's willing to speculate at this point.
Okay, and then I guess this is somewhat related. Nate Duvall asked me a bunch of questions, and so I proceeded to ask Kevin Greenwood these questions. And I want to know whether you think that this discussion or this line of discussion is helpful. In the questions are along the lines of, what exactly does it look like if we fail and then the bridge fails? Port's left with a bridge that they can't operate, and who winds up bearing costs and who winds up having to, you know, it's not like the problem just vanishes if they don't give us money. Is there any hopefulness in your discussion in us fleshing that scenario out, or is that beside the point?
I don't know that we need to flesh it out too far unless you find something that's compelling in the fleshing it out. I think folks recognize that if there is that a crisis begets action, and they don't want to be in a crisis. And so I think that's pretty clear. I don't think we need to scare folks onto that.
Right.
If there's something that is surprising about it, I would be interested to know, so I can build it into whether it's something that we would want to seed into our discussion with folks.
Right. I mean, that's sort of my thinking, is that we don't, you know, that the ultimatum / threat is not a valuable thing in an environment like this where they're doing their best in the first place. But that I think what you just said is that if we do discover, in looking at it, that there's something that they probably didn't think of, that they should know, that we should share that.
That's right.
Great.
Any other questions for Dan? No? Thank you very much, Dan.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
All right.
Okay, we're gonna go back to co-chair's report. Commissioner Fund.
No.
I would just say that right now, this is our one meeting for the month. This is going to be a very busy month. We have a lot of things going on this month. We don't know where everything will lie, so there's a small chance that we may end up having to call a special session at some point if there's decisions that need to be made. So if anybody's leaving for a couple of weeks or going to be gone the second half, let me know so I can try to design that in.
I saw on Facebook that we're all getting holiday bonuses.
Oh, really? Congratulations.
Is that the board? Or is that us?
Both.
Oh, really?
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah, you know what? We're gonna quadruple your wages.
Yay.
Then you get paid. Okay, I don't have anything else other than that. We'll move on to project director, bridge update.
So we're working through final comments and responses on the 15% base design that Hewitt submitted. That will be the basis of the opinion of probable cost that they are developing at the HRWSBA.
I'm really impressed. I'm very thankful.
So they're working through that, we'll work through that this month with them and our independent cost estimators. We will provide a briefing to the board at the January 1st January meeting on the outcomes of where that is. And where the project stands at that point. Current funding, we're working off of the 15 million that we received from Washington States through the Move Ahead Washington funding, our current funding source. As I've talked to everyone about that cash flow, we are really cash flow constrained until we get an additional funding source such as infra. So infra will dictate when we are able to move into phase 1B. Or the receipt of additional Oregon or Washington funding when we start the next biennium in July of 2025. So between now and that period of time, we're on a cash flow constrained and won't be moving into 1B until those additional funding sources are identified or agreements are reached. We're also working with ODOT and FHWA on our STIP language, which will help with our infra grant agreement and making sure that we have the right phases in there. Right now, we're in the environmental phase. We need to make sure we have a preliminary engineering, a right of way, I think other category, which is typically utilities for ODOT, and then a construction phase and a demo phase. And that will help to be able to provide our funding plan. So we're working through that with FHWA and ODOT right now to be able to finalize those. But we did get word from FHWA. They think there's a path forward. We just got to get through the process to get there. So BIP, there's rumors that they will make those announcements in the winter. So that could be as late as March, but we will keep you updated if something comes out. So that was the latest I heard today on that. Tree MOAs, we did receive a proposal from Nez Pierce. We talked to FHWA about that. There's a meeting Wednesday morning with Nez Pierce and FHWA. Some of our folks will be attending in order to further discuss that proposal. So we'll bring that back whenever that advances a little farther. It's very preliminary right now and nothing that's agreed upon or needs to be brought forward right now. Umatilla, we did send a response back to them based on our meeting last week that we are, the authority is willing to sign the MOA as it is drafted. We talked to FHWA, they're generally in agreement. They have to do their final legal review. That's why I'd say generally, but they believe that if there's no substantive changes to it, that they would be willing to sign the agreement right now as well. FHWA. So good progress there. Yakima and Warm Springs we're still working on.
So who exactly are the signatories to these agreements?
FHWA, the Bridge Authority, and the tribe. ODOT is not a signatory on this.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Does that affect the ability to transfer the bridge in the future to a state entity?
No, because the mitigations will be completed by the end of the construction period. So as long as the bridge is built, the mitigation should be done. Right.
Yeah, the payments would end when the bridge opens, basically.
That's what I was looking for.
Yep.
Thank you.
Right-of-way activities are on a hold until we can get through the infra grant process so that we can sign the agreement with ODOT for their services that'll be rendered. They're taking the lead on the port facilities. So we're kind of on hold on the right-of-way stuff until we get through the infra and get that agreements in place so we can have additional conversations with ODOT. Record of decision, we are moving forward with moving towards the record of decision. The reevaluation has been reviewed by ODOT, has had one review with FHWA. We responded and sent comments back on that. So that piece is getting closer to signature, as well as the Section 106 MOA. And then the ROD right now is going to still be on hold with this STIP infra funding discussion that's happening is going to still impact the ROD as well. So we are working with them to move that stuff forward, and we'll keep you updated as it moves forward. That's all I have.
Questions? Seeing none. Legal report.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think Mike has really touched on anything I would report on, as he said, with respect to the right-of-way acquisition issues. ODOT's going to serve as the lead agency in procuring the property from the port, but that procurement's on hold pending funds becoming available. And the only other issue, and I think Mike touched on this as well, is Foster Garvey, as you know, has been working with the county and the bond council to develop the credit facility agreement, and they provided the intercreditor agreement to ODOT. And ODOT has requested some revisions to that agreement that Foster Garvey is working on. I don't have anything else to report.
Any questions? No? Okay. Government relations report.
Hello. Approach the table here. Chairs, thank you. Here's the authority. For the record, my name is Dan Marr. I handle government relations strategy for the bridge replacement project. Big picture, we are, of course, looking ahead to 2025, which projects to be a busy year in government relations. Thanks to Dan Bates for his update already. We'll hear from Brad Boswell and Jim Kolb, who I already see up on the screen in just a bit. Big picture efforts. Mike covered a lot of this at the federal level. We're focused on advocacy for getting our infra agreement in place and supporting the project's application to the Bridge Investment Program, also known as BIP. State level, we're looking ahead to legislative sessions in both states. Boswell and Thorn Run are engaged in the work that's happening pre-session, tracking those dynamics. With the project, we're centering our own message and asks and building our lobbying plan for once we get past the upcoming opinion of probable cost, OPC, and the start of legislative sessions. Phase 1B planning is underway. Communications and government relations teams are working together to create a unified plan that supports both our message to the public and our government partners. So focused on that, obviously, with those goals that I just mentioned in mind. So that's all from me. Any questions before we move on to our partners?
All right. Brad?
Sure, thanks. I think a lot was already covered there. We are continuing to do outreach with now the electeds in both the 14th and 17th legislative districts, which are kind of our home turf. This week is legislative committee day, so I'll be kind of scouting around, chatting with folks. There continues to be a lot of interest in some sort of a transportation package up here in Washington. Similar to us, most projects are facing significant cost increases, and trying to figure out how to navigate that is going to be one of the big issues with in this upcoming session. There is starting to be some confluence between both the transportation package and revenue needs, as well as the general fund operating revenue needs. And that's code for, they're looking at some very large broad-based taxes that could assist both budgets. All of that, I want to flag with folks, those conversations are much bigger than just this project, and incorporate many stakeholders and a lot of teeth gnashing and all of that. However, again, the need for more transportation resources is definitely one of the top of mind issues up here. We continue to sort of position ourselves as well as we possibly can. We had some good meetings with legislative staff around the project, as well as kind of phasing and timing that we're working from. And we're continuing to also plan towards a day on the Hill sometime, I believe, in early to mid February. And we'll anchor those dates in the not too distant future. All of this, I really want to kind of also explain to folks that while we're going to be doing a lot of activity and things like that, there's going to be an enormous number of unknowns for the foreseeable future. Most decision making relative to final budget and packages and all of those kinds of things do not really become public until sort of the very end of session. So that's a long-winded way of kind of preparing you that there will be a lot of times where I literally am not going to I'm not going to know what exactly decisions have been made or when they're going to be made on this project, as well as, anything else, just because they're locked up within budget negotiations and tax negotiations, all of which are usually very much behind closed doors. I will obviously be working to keep everyone as informed as possible, but I just want to prepare folks for that. There's going to be a long time before there's any clarity on what else Washington may or may not be able to do. That said, we're continuing to make sure that we are positioned as well as we possibly can. So I'm going to kind of stop there. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much, Brad. We don't see you. Have a happy holidays. Jim.
Well, thank you, everyone. Like Dan, I'll do for the record, Jim Kolb, Summit Strategies, do federal government relations for the replacement project. A lot of what we've been working on has been covered, by Mike and Dan and others, but obviously very focused on trying to get this project agreement for the infra grants as well as the CDS awards in place as soon as possible. We've been working very closely with the delegation on that. We have, really trying to use them as a tool to light a fire under the administration to move forward and try to finalize the discussions. So we know, Murray, Senator Murray, Senator Merkley, Congressman Blumenauer staff, as well as we believe Senator Cantwell's staff have reached out to DOT and or FHWA on this. We've a number of them have heard back from FHWA that they understand the urgency, that they're working, with Mike and the team to try to finalize this. So, we're going to keep that pressure on so that this isn't something that just kind of slides, but they, definitely said we'd be looking at looking into early next year. So we're going to have a tight window there to try to get this thing finalized, but they are, certainly aware of the urgency. Also, continuing to push on the BIP application. As you're all well aware, we've got, letters from, both the Washington side of the congressional delegation as well as the Oregon side. Those letters have gone in. We know Senator Murray's staff, Congressman Blumenauer, and Senator Merkley's staff have reached out on the BIP agreement, asking about the timing. As Mike said, we've heard back winter. Kind of nebulous, but we know from conversations that I've had and others have had with senior DOT officials, they're trying to, and the Biden DOT officials, I think we need to clarify that a little bit right now. They're trying to push out as many of the grants that they have available to them as possible. Obviously, there's time constraints on some of that, so whether they get to these before January 20th is hard to tell. And then once the 20th hits, we'll have the Trump administration coming in. We're in that transition. They're just really ramping up down there now. I'm sure most of you have seen that they've announced the DOT secretary, former Congressman Sean Duffy from Wisconsin. He just started his rounds on the Hill today. Doesn't appear to be any issues with his nomination. He'd probably be in place right around the 20th, but we'll have to see. And then how long it takes to get staffed up. I think in any transition, if whatever doesn't happen before the end of the administration, you may have a lag until they get their senior political team in place to start making announcements. So we'll see what happens. And to that end, Mike and I have been having conversations about timing of a potential DC delegation trip. We're trying to monitor what the right time would be, depending on where things go with the project agreement, where they are with the BIP negotiations, and where DOT is with their staffing. So, we're thinking, early spring, maybe late winter, but we'll continue to, kind of gauge what the best time to have a delegation, come meet with DOT officials once they have folks in place. And then the last thing I want to mention is earlier today at the Oregon Business Summit, Senator Merkley, during his remarks, called out the project and the need to get this done. So we're happy to see that he included those things, those in his the project in his remarks. So with that, that concludes my comments, and happy to take any questions.
I'm traveling to DC. I think I emailed the appropriate people, and I'll be there January 6th for the morning. So I just want to make sure that you were also aware of that I do have that ability.
Jake Okenberg.
Yep.
You got his email?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
So I just want to make sure that.
We're working on trying to set up meetings
Okay.
with Senator Merkley's new staff, as well as incoming Congresswoman Dexter's staff, to introduce the project. Well, introduce you and then introduce the project to them.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you very much for all your hard work back there,
Absolutely.
Mr. Kolb.
You got it.
Okay. Do we have any partner updates, FHWA, ODOT, WashDOT stakeholders online? We usually don't, but I always want to open it up. Okay. Let's move on to the consent agenda. Has everyone had a chance to review the consent agenda? I would entertain a motion.
Move that we approve the consent agenda items as written and documented.
Second. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Committee reports, funding and finance, Mr. Paulson.
Thanks. A lot of the things we talked about in funding and finance have been touched on prior. Working on the loans between Hood River County and ourselves, the grants from the state has been worked on. Hopefully we can get that done quickly. The invoice process and whatnot that we're working with our vendors and everything is smoother than it was initially. So we're not having to go back and go through process invoices. They're being submitted to us in a more streamlined manner. You'll have to go through re-process, which takes us time. The toll collection is ahead of the required pace. We need to meet TIFIA still based on the assumptions we have in place. And everybody else mentioned everything else we talked about. Pretty brief.
One comment on yours on the toll report that is in the package that we got from the port.
Yep.
It showed that the toll rates were down a bit this past month. And Debbie, do you see that the November number will get updated a little bit this month with the correction of P-square?
No, actually, I don't believe so, because what happened with P-square was totally on the customer side. Our reports all looked normal. And so what got reported in there was the transactions that actually occurred. But what happened with that whole situation, by the way, is that the transactions were being captured and everything was normal, except the piece that actually makes them go to the customer account. So a person would cross over, it would record it, our reports looked right, but it was not hitting the customer account. There was a disconnect between the BreezeBuy system and the actual customer account. So that's where the issue was at, which it has been resolved. And won't be a problem going forward because P-square was very apologetic that that was allowed to go on for as long as it did. But our reports are correct.
So let me see if I understand that. So the report that we got, which is revenue.
Yes.
The revenue report is right, kind of, but we really didn't receive that amount of revenue on the books because of this charging error in the software.
Well, actually, we did. It would have just been a cash transaction. The cash. So the way BreezeBuy works, we have the cash, but we don't recognize it as revenue until the transactions take place. And the transactions then took place normally, but they just didn't show up on the customer account. So about 200, there were 10,000 accounts affected. We have about 40,000 BreezeBuy accounts. So we're about 10,000 accounts that were affected. There were about 200 that went negative because so much hit them all at once, it threw them negative. So there were about 200 accounts that there was probably a little bit of cash that we would not have, that we did not receive. So there was some cash, you're correct, that we did not receive until after this was corrected in December. But the report that you get is based on our reports, which are not based on cash. They are based on the transactions. That's why I show you the transaction information, because our revenue is based on transactions. And so
Okay,
that has all been, the cash side of it has all been corrected now as well. But the revenue is what it is and won't be changing.
thank you.
You're welcome.
The only thing that would change on the revenue side would be as if you get a settlement with the insurance company, some of that will come to us, right?
That is correct. We are waiting on that. And I haven't heard an update recently, but as with all things, it has to go through a process. And so it is still moving forward. And we still don't know exactly who is paying what, but it is moving forward for the insurance reimbursement on the lift on the.
And do you know how
truck.
much was put in for us, our portion?
We didn't break it out. I would have to go through and look at and do the math on it, but I believe that lost toll revenue is around 200 or between 200 and $300,000, and you guys get about a fourth of that, I believe. I'm really doing math off the top of my head, which is probably not a good thing. But yeah, so there will be some of that money that will be coming back to the Bridge Authority. Yes.
Thanks.
Are you reasonably optimistic about that all clearing?
What I have heard, my understanding is that the truck that hit the bridge did have insurance, and so we are going through that process. I don't know what their limit was, and I don't know how it will be. I don't know how it will all come out in the end, but there is insurance, so I'm hopeful that we're made whole with the insurance. But I don't know that at this point.
Thanks.
Any other questions on funding and finance? Okay, engineering.
Can I ask Eric to? Oh, Catherine?
Great. So we had a meeting where we went, and I'm just reading the minutes, so thank you for the minutes. We went through the invoices that we all just approved, the consent agenda. So we went through all that and we approved that. We went through the HRWSBA phase 1B amendment that's up and coming up here, and we submitted that we should move forward with that. And then we talked about the MOAs with the different tribes and what's going on with those and how we can move those forward and the impacts that will have on the bridge.
We also reviewed the Salmon Safe preliminary report,
Correct.
which basically it's their first report on our particular project, which basically said, yeah, we got a project. Yeah, we think they're doing the right thing. There's a lot of things they got to do yet, but we're heading off in the right direction.
It also ties in with the draft biological opinion, so
yeah,
they're at least talking together. I thought it was important. I think the other thing I would add about the HNTB proposal that we're going to talk about is it's actually for a 2-year duration, and it took me a while to catch on to that as we were talking through it. So I think it's important to kind of look at it in that context. It's for 25 and 26, which gets us through the 1B and then some. So,
and I think the reason for and some is negotiating a 2 with somebody.
Phases never end in construction. There's always an and some. Yeah, dealing with that in my own project.
So the Salmon Safe, is Intertribal Fisheries involved in that, or what is the role of Intertribal Fisheries in that whole process?
The tribes we speak with the tribes individually. They're not involved in the Salmon Safe process themselves right now, but there is interest in the tribal fisheries becoming involved, specifically from the NISPers. tribe and also, I think, yeah, I love it, don't quote me on that. So there is.
That they would get involved as individual tribes or through intertribal fisheries.
They will be
The-
briefed on it.
They're gonna be, but they're also interested in the science. So they're more interested in what the reports are gonna say as opposed to contributing to the reports.
Got it.
And I
Okay.
think that was really interesting is we started naming scientists who are involved in Salmon Safe and they knew of the scientists
One of
as
them
well.
was she on CRIFIC or BIA? One of the ladies that's a member of their board is a member of either CRIFIC or BIA.
Yeah.
So they're familiar with them. But again,
You're only getting good
Oh,
reaction.
yeah,
Yes.
there's a positive addition to the,
Good. That's kind of what
to
I'm
the
saying.
project,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
The scientists that they have that are working on the salmon safes are, I mean, the names that you hear all over the Northwest when you start talking about salmon. I think that was the really compelling component of that one when they came and talked to us.
One last thing on the keyword estimates that we talked about. After we're done with this OPC, there's going to be two more estimates. One at 60% and then one at design completion. The 60% is scheduled in the November timeframe of 26, 25, excuse me, 25 and 100% July of 26. So
But I'm sorry, so, but the what we're expecting one, is it the 15% we're expecting in December?
December is about 15%.
And what
And
is the
then
date there?
6,
Are we comfortable that it is in the month of December?
it's
Yeah.
this year.
Yeah.
It's happening this month.
Right.
And then we will brief the board on it on the 13th.
Okay.
of January. Yeah.
so the 15% week after, next week.
It's next week. It's Monday,
Yeah, next
Tuesday,
week,
Wednesday.
the ENC committee is sitting down with Kiewit and KMC and going through their estimate.
Good.
One is on Monday, another one's Tuesday, and then a combined on Wednesday.
Any other questions for engineering? Okay, we'll move on to governance, administration, and operations. Arthur.
So I had some personal issues, so I was unable to attend the meeting personally, but I was there by Zoom. But Jake kind of pushed the meeting along. There wasn't a lot that was really discussed. It was a pretty brief meeting. Jake, do you recall any issues? I can't think of anything that we discussed that was of interest to the broader group. Maybe minus Catherine, since everyone's passing everything to her.
Catherine wasn't there. I think the one thing that's been on our list for months is a discussion on whether or not we move forward with hiring an executive director.
Right.
And so that was a discussion that we had, and but our third member wasn't there, so it was kind of just with staff and what that would look like and where that's going to possibly.
But I thought we were going to discuss this level.
Right, we had a brief discussion, but that's where it would come up here, and we've been talking about the executive director role. I know Mike and I have brought it up and what that looks like going forward, and more importantly, with the discussion on HNTB's phase 2, the question is I don't know if anybody's looked at Mike's emails and how hard it is for him to keep up. There's just so much that we're asking him to do that really is our roles. It's on the owner's role. And HNTB, it's really not their specialty that they've been doing for a long time. And I have to say that Mike's been doing a valiant job of keeping this whole thing together. When, his job's to, try to build bridges and construct things. And so the other question is there things that we are currently paying for through some of our contracts, either with HNTB or subcontractors of HNTB, that we could also bring internal, where if it was internal, we could do it for a lot cheaper. And so that was kind of where that discussion was going. From my thoughts, we have Kevin Greenwood as the interim executive director. But we don't, usually weigh on him very much because we're trying to keep the clearest delineation between the port and us, as we've seen in the last few months, that we don't want to be seen as part of the port. One of the things, though, that I think Kevin could do is if the board is interested in moving that direction for phase 1B is we could have Kevin come up with a draft job description, and I believe we have a meeting this Friday as well.
You're talking about the meeting between us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Friday morning. Yep.
Friday morning. And then if Kevin can draft a job description, then that's something we can start reviewing. And then we would probably bring in each of the heads of the committees to look at what else. So potentially could be brought under that executive director role, which roles that we can take off of Mike's plate so that he can do the things that he needs to do. But that was just.
Yeah, sorry. I just, my understanding from our discussion at our committee meeting was that this would very quickly be promoted to a board level discussion, probably at the January meeting. Is that how you see it also?
Right. And so I guess before we have the meeting on Friday, this is the first shot across the bow of, is this something that the board feels worthwhile moving forward with now? And if so, we'll continue on. If the board says no, then we can put it back on the future to-do list.
We're moving forward means generating a job description, basically. Yeah.
I think now is a great opportunity to explore us forming or building our own muscle to operate as we intended when this authority was formed. Especially if we're successful in achieving our funding goals shortly, we're going to need to start running really quick if we are wildly successful. If not, we always can have contingency plans in place, and we'll need those anyway. But if strategically, my opinion is it'd be good for us to start running on our own.
And as you move into, I agree, by the way, and as we move into design, we're going to have to be thinking about maintaining our bridge long term. So we have an executive director that can help focus attention in on that as well and have some continuity going down the road.
I guess the analysis I shared at the meeting last week was that I certainly, there are several different scenarios of what the future holds for us. And number one is everything's full steam ahead. We either get the BIP or it looks promising. So we're expecting to go from it through a robust design stage into construction phase. Clearly, this makes sense in that context. Alternate is that we're pretty confident that we're not moving forward directly into construction, but we still want to go, we still have the proper funding in line to do the phase 1B design work. And in that scenario, I still support this concept, although it's not quite as clear a benefit. It's definitely a benefit, but it's I should say not as clear a benefit, but not as valuable a benefit. And then the third possibility, which I'm told is a relatively low probability, but that we're unsuccessful in separating the infra money so that we have the design funds available so that we can move ahead with the full design. In that case, it seems more questionable to me whether we invest in the process of making this happen and then discover and only to really have very little benefit from that process. But what was portrayed to us in the committee meeting is that Mike is quite confident that we will be able to be successful at the infra partition. And so given those probabilities, I think it totally makes sense to go forward with the planning process to move into this hiring phase. Just don't pull the trigger until we are comfortable that it's worth pulling the trigger.
Right. Other thoughts?
Given those three possible scenarios, would be helpful if the finance committee gamed those out.
Well, the one I'm most concerned about is the middle one, right?
Yeah.
And that's the one that I thought that you said. I thought you said that was a workable problem.
I've been this ever since we've formed. This has always been a thing that's been in the back of my mind anyway. And at every phase, it sort of runs back back of the envelope numbers in my mind anyway. But I have not gone through a full financial analysis to go through every one of these. I have not received concurrence or direction to go through this and present it as such. If the board would like to pursue this, finance committee can come back or put some things together to go through each thing and say roughly within some range, here's about what we're looking at. No guarantee, but about here's what we can't do.
I would think that before we pull the trigger, we absolutely have to do that.
Yeah, that's pretty.
And the question is, do we do that before asking Kevin to help us with job descriptions? And I can't see that that's necessary before we do the job description phase.
No, we can do that concurrently. That's easy to do.
We're not asking you to do something that's big.
No,
on your time.
no,
Okay.
no. Those things are really easy to put together.
If you're volunteering that, I think that that's a.
Thanks.
Well, I mean, yeah, just I gave you several outs there, and you didn't take them.
I didn't take any of them. I'm a glutton for punishment. I know. Yeah. It's let me rephrase. It's easy for me to put them together. I enjoy volunteering my time. So, yes.
My only hesitancy to ask anybody to do any work would be that we can't separate the infra money. So I would think the exercise would be much better done once we know for sure we can separate the infra money and then move forward. I mean, not trying to.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask what the timing is on that. Are we talking a couple of weeks?
That's kind of my.
I think we're probably a couple months from
Oh,
it.
really?
But I mean,
How can it be a couple of months? Because that's into the new administration.
by the time
Going into the
it's like to get the paper to move, it does make sense.
realistically right now,
Yeah.
we're probably January, February, I'm hoping. But I think we're gonna end up.
We'll find out a lot on Thursday. So this is part of we might need a special meeting by the end of the month. We don't know what's going to happen through all these conversations we have. The one thing I would say is infra is one piece of it. We still have $15 million from Washington. We have $20 million coming from Oregon, and we have another 30 baked in Washington that we're going to need to get Oregon to come up to the plate to get access to likely to that money as well.
Right.
But if we
There's
can
another
do
path.
that, there is also still another path. It's not just the infra dollars. So the other big thing that's really kept us back from pulling this trigger is we haven't had an overhead rate, and you'll recall at our last meeting that we're spending some money to get that overhead rate number done so that we'll have the money to help pay for that position to run these meetings in essence. So that'll go a long ways as well.
I'm just saying, so I would be hesitant to start this before the infra money is divided. And I also think that to get an executive director to do the work that I would expect we would want them to do is a pretty high penny in this current situation we find ourselves. And I think that we have to be very careful before we move forward is what are our processes of conflict of interest of who we all are working with, who is going to apply for this. Like there's already a lot of social media garble. I know it's not important, but at the same time, we don't want to put this out there for this price for a bridge that might not get built. I mean, there's a lot of perception is everything. And so I just am hesitant to waste anyone's time to put that together before we know we actually are moving through 1B, into the next realm. So that's my point.
I think that's a good point, but it also, I mean, talk about grant, we talk about job description, we talk about advertising, all that sort of thing. There's still a big run up to trying and hiring someone. And last time I looked, the executive directors are not just all over everywhere. So I think, well, it's a unique person that we'd be looking for to fill that position, I think.
Right, there's a process. We just finished hiring executive director for the county, and I've been through that process several times for very similar sorts of jobs. I guess the warning that I would give is that if you pull the trigger too early on it, in other words, pull the trigger before there's a clear runway that this job is going to last for more than a couple of weeks, you get poorer candidates, and it filters out that people don't apply for jobs if they know the job isn't going to give them some longevity. And frankly, if we don't have a job, we don't know that we're proceeding all the way through construction, we're going to get much lesser candidates than if we have a project that is confirmed to be construction ready, or at least on the runway towards construction. So that's another reason not to go too early on it, but you can certainly do your homework and get everything. You get all the descriptions prepared, you can get all the paperwork prepared. But in terms of going out and hiring a recruiting firm and advertising, you can advertise all you want. People are going to ignore it if they don't see the future to it, and they have no trouble figuring out where we are in the process. It's basically the people who you want are the people who instantly know that there's no point to applying for it, right? And if someone, someone's disqualifying if someone applies for the job before having those questions answered, because that shows they don't understand what they're applying for.
I guess I'm suggesting there's a whole lot of planning that we have to do behind the scenes before we get to the advertising part.
Yes.
And you can do all that planning, get that all ready and decide, no, it's not gonna happen.
Yeah, I didn't think we were
And that's
disagreeing.
probably okay.
I thought we were refining the description of what the trigger point looks like.
I guess I'm saying that, yeah, we probably ought to do all the background and at least know what we're talking about before we get to that point where it's, we got to do it. And then we're doing it in a scramble and a panic and not thoughtfully.
I think we're gonna have a lot more of those answers before we're in a place to concretely make that decision to go forward. Just even if we make the decision to move forward with the homework today.
Right.
Just going through the process is going to take some time. We're going to hear a number of answers between here and that date.
We're in a dynamic situation. We'll always know more tomorrow. So
yeah, but we're getting some answers.
Yeah.
Pretty soon.
And in all honesty, this has been on our, in the future list for a year that we've been sitting on this, working on all the other problems as we go through. And at the end of some of the conversations, it's like, well, it would have been nice if we went through this like 3 months ago, so we would have the answers. But that's in all things. Any other thoughts?
I really like what Eric said. I think we ought to put a plan in place and get what we can done before we have to pull the trigger, go right up to that edge, and then we can let it sit and simmer for a while if we need to.
So really what we have left to discuss in January is the question of how close are we to that trigger point, not whether we should do the preliminary work. It sounds like we're in pretty solid agreement on preparing and doing the preliminaries.
Well, and I think if anything in January, if we've done the homework, then we should be able to work with finance and say, if we pull this trigger, this is what we see as cost savings or cost expenses. And this is how much work we can take off of Mike that allows him and ready to go do other things that they need to do. And so I think there's a little bit of two sets of facets to that, because we also have to work with Mike to see what he needs that position to take on.
I'd certainly be very cautious about proceeding with this without a solid understanding of what the cost savings are and what the nature of those cost savings is, because we're taking on risk, we're adding risk for some cost savings. That's kind of how I view the whole picture, and I want to know that we're all willing to take that risk and have our eyes wide open as to what that risk is, because it's nice to say, it's going to be
carrying around with you.
Yeah, to me, the big risk we've got is federal highways coming in and saying, hey, this entire cost is non-reimbursable.
Right. In which case we can't make that work then.
That wouldn't work out anyway.
Carly, you've been really quiet. Can you say something?
I don't have anything down.
Okay. I just want to know if you disagree.
Okay. Communications, we don't have a second meeting, so Marla, Jessica, do you have anything for today? Not to put you on the spot.
I don't. Jessica, do you?
Hi, everyone. I think that the biggest thing to know is that JLA is collaborating closely with Dan Marr to just figure out how we can develop a communications plan that really enhances both the government relations and also what the public is hoping to learn, and all the updates that we've been talking about related to project progress, how this is a great project, it's a wise investment, but also being able to demonstrate all of the meaningful work that's happening on the design side. And so we have last week, Dan and I met on Friday and started to brainstorm some of those key messages. And we're going to actually bring a proposal of what we hope to communicate to the public and our lawmakers throughout phase 1B, but we're really going to get into the details for the first quarter. So we should be able to bring you all an update soon. That's it for me.
Any questions? All right.
Surprised I didn't see any of you on Friday at 10 a.m. out on the bridge. I was out there to celebrate the centennial, and all these people were honking the horns at me and seemed very festive.
The real
real
centennial. Well, centennial was Friday, December 6th, 10 a.m.
Glad you didn't get run over.
Did you drive your regular car when you stopped, or was it? That wasn't great weather either. I'm sorry. Glad we did it when we did. Or
No, I mean, the port took they did their weather calculations and said October 6th is better than December 6th, and that actually worked out exactly that way.
Yep, absolutely.
Good full day instead of a crappy day.
Yep. Okay, new business action items. We have our HNTB Phase 1 Amendment Execution Approval.
So I don't know if you need a lot of discussion or we should just wait for questions. This is just setting us a not to exceed amount. As Jessica said, you'll see a lot of the detail for what is related to the communications piece and their communications plan that they're going to develop. So the budget that they're setting is a budget for them to use to set up that plan. And then they'll monitor that on a month-by-month basis. Kind of the same thing with really all the categories, is these are not to exceed amounts with scope tied to them. But that really depends on the direction that the authority asks us to go as we go. So it's not a lump sum amount. Just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. It's a time and materials based contract.
And there's going to be decision points all along whether those monies get spent.
There will. So with each committee, as we've been doing all along, we'll brief each committee on progress made that month, what the budgets are against that month, what the plans are in the upcoming months. And at any time, if you're like, yeah, we're not going to do X, Y, or Z, what you'll see in there right now is we have not planned to start any phase 1B work until April 1st. That's contingent on us getting the infra grant. If we don't get the infra grant until July, all that work will push till July. So there's some items in there that are contingent on funding things happening. What we're trying to do right now is keep a skeleton staff to keep like mitigation, the NEPA documents, the grant administration, the things that we have to kind of keep going so that we can stretch that budget out until we get to that June or July timeframe where we'll, if not get infra, we'll get other funding sources coming in, like the 20 million from the Oregon Lottery bond, the 30 million from Washington, which will then start to come together to make it closer or make the decision possible to maybe go through with design even without infra. And we'll see what happens in the Oregon and Washington legislative sessions this year as well. So we're trying to figure out a way to make that everything last, but keep things meaningful things moving forward so that we're progressing and making progress. But gives us enough time and gets us through that July timeframe, and we'll have to make a bigger decision if no funding comes in.
Yeah, we certainly need to see a sketch of kind of how that all fits together.
We can do that.
Yeah, I don't have any questions.
Well, we went through, looked at it pretty hard. We agree with it. I believe is a fair thing to say. We looked at the sequencing of the work. We looked at the scope of work. The other thing that makes a lot of sense, Mike's got a good history that he doesn't just go spend the money to spend the money. He protects the money. So as he gets into it, if he sees that it's not necessary to do, he'll push it off. There's a number of decisions that the project's going to have to make in the next 3 months, that as we get through each of those steps, we'll probably have to make some adjustments to that work plan, which is fine. That's pretty typical and standard. So,
but the point is, we have contract in place, we have numbers in place, but money doesn't get spent unless we ask for something to be done.
Right.
And I'll say I took a look at it really hard. They haven't spent about 10% of what was left. And so I wanted to make sure that everyone had enough time to review this fully and what we're asking them to do for us. And so one of the things I was looking at is a time extension, just like what we did with Kiewit. Because there's 10% of the money that would get us at least a month so that we could more closely look at all of those possible actions and get closer to those decision times. In the end, after reviewing it, it looked like it wasn't going to get us anything other than spend a little bit more money and more of Mike's time. Because from my perspective, Mike is doing a great job, and the HNTB staff is doing a great job, and we want to keep them and keep moving forward. And this helps set us up to get through phase 1B, however that may occur after we make big decisions. So, other thoughts?
I just had one question on the projected, and I think I mentioned this to you, Mike, but for the authority, I think we should think about like the origin of this blanket annual price escalation. Do we also alternatively want to be considering a ceiling there? Cost of living, or tie it to something? I would advocate for tying it to the COLA or hit a ceiling of COLA. And if it's 2.5 1 year, then that's what that escalation is, rather than holding our authority to be spending our public money on always a 4%.
You're talking about indexing.
Yeah, something, or just understanding how it was landed or decided to have it be a 4% annual escalation.
Explain where that came from, and it's not a direct relationship here because of how things get calculated, but the contract right now has a not to exceed 4% average salary increase by firm. So no one firm can increase their average salary more than 4%. So we put that 4% based on that total number to give us a bucket of money to cover that potential 4% escalation in staffing. That, because that can change, the different people could be here, that 4% could be different. It just gives that bucket of money. So that's the contractual way this was like, and it's kind of your contingency bucket for those that you have to authorize the increases as well. So you kind of have a double check on that. It's not just that we can do a 4% the next year and we automatically go to it. It's contingent on approval of raises and not going over that average 4% by firm.
So stated a different way, that is only tapped if your direct costs go up.
Go up, correct.
And only at the percentage that your direct
That we're
costs
allowed to go up.
and
Yeah.
it's capped at 4.
Yeah.
So if we approve it at this and we see another year like 22 or 23 return, and it was projected to be 7% or 8%, we wouldn't be revisiting this.
We are capped our contract unless we change the contract. We cannot on average go above 4%. So if all the companies gave a 5% raise, we would all be capped at a 4% amount. So you would actually be we'd all be salary capped at that point. Now, individually, someone might get a 10% and 3 other people don't get anything, and it would average out to 4%. But by firm, the total increase cannot be more than 4% average.
So, but the other scenario that you bring up, let's say it was 8%. If they wanted to go over the 4%, they have all the right to do that, but that's at their cost.
Yeah.
They can't bill us for that delta.
That's what I mean when I say salary cap is we could still give the raises to folks. We would just not be able to.
Yeah, I guess it's just an interesting dividing line there. Does our project really want to be taking that on at all? It's, I mean, alternately, it's a private corporate decision on the bottom line.
Yep.
And most projects bid and how you bid them.
Most contracts typically have some kind of a salary cap increase for either cost of living or merit raises.
But right now, say in a year where it's 2%, our project could be carrying a cost there because the firms we're giving them the leeway to still go up to a 4 average. Yeah. We're not tying it to anything that's qualified against true costs.
Yep. And we could do that. We talked about that as an option of tying it to, I think you said it, Sound Transit used to tie it to CIP plus 2%.
CPI.
Or CPI, sorry. Got an acronym
What's it
wrong.
stand for?
Consumer Price Index.
Yes.
HRW.
They used to do it that plus 2% or plus 1%. Yeah. We could do something like that as well. We just need to make a modification in the contract.
Yeah, so basically this is a TNM time and material as well as cost reimbursable. Your client is paying for the actual cost. So it's not like everybody gets 4% every year.
Right.
Just the actual cost they are getting, the price is going up, but there's cap for 4%. So if nobody's getting 4%, everybody's getting 2%, maybe it's gonna be 2% for 1 year.
Right.
Across the board.
But once you start the second year, you lose that benefit from the first year.
Correct.
In other words, if you underspent, you don't get to carry it forward.
That's
It starts over.
It's gone that year.
And what we do locally is we do 80% of CPI for Seattle, and that's what we do as a county. But knowing that a lot of our contractors are not local here to the gorge, that's one thing. Because I was thinking the same thing as Marla was. Why did we pick 4% as the average when we could just do CPI for Seattle or something like that? And I guess it's up to the board. How does the board feel? And do you want to send back a different thoughts for the company to review?
I think one thing to consider is that the folks you're talking about is generally technical people from very large companies that compete worldwide or at least nationwide. So the one concern that I would have is you generally get what you pay for. So if you really hold the raises down, at some point, you're going to change people out and you're not going to attract the talent that you really want on this project. My opinion.
I think I just see it more from a policy perspective as a public agency. Our funding and our revenue streams are public dollars. So what is our insurance back to the public to explain how we landed at that decision? And that's all that I want to see a record for. I'm not necessarily trying to debate the four, but I do think in the interest of the public, we should all be clear on how we protect our agencies' dollars that are tax dollars to make sure that we aren't walking ourselves down a path of benefiting the private sector. So similar to how if we had an executive director or staff as a public agency, we would be tying very cleanly what a cost of living increase is. That's separate from a salary promotion or benefit based on qualifications. So I see it from a different line. Those decisions of how a firm wants to keep their all-stars, not our area. I just want to know that we're standing on firm footing of what is the background of how we landed it for. How did you decide to propose? And it could have been that we told you that in the original documents. I just don't recall. But I just want that track record clear for all of us.
Average for the industry of where, like if we went back and asked our corporate, like what our average salary is across the company, and it ranges right around that 4%. And that's kind of an industry standard number. So that's what we used for the backup for that. But, we talked about making it CPI or something else. I mean, you could do it either way. If you're more comfortable with something like that, we could tie it to CPI and a percentage or something. We tried to do all the contracts. I think all of them are the same way. So we tried to be consistent across all contracts. So like keywords, it's the same thing we are.
And all the subs as well.
Subs and everybody are all the same. And then the other piece of that is just so everybody's aware too, field office rate versus home office rate.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody that's full-time on the project is at a field office rate if the company has one. If they're not full-time on the project, then they're at the office overhead rate, which is typically higher.
Quite a bit higher.
Quite a bit, depending on the firm. Ours is quite a bit higher, actually. But there's some FAR regulations to that. You have to commit to that person being full-time for 6 months. And it can't be in that other office. They need to be either locally or like home office. So we went from 3 people to 7 people this time to capture all the people that we anticipate to be full-time. So
we saved some money if I offer you a corner of my garage.
No, it's still the same thing whether I sit here or whether I sit at your garage. But I'd be happy to sit with your car and we can talk about it. That'd be great. So
I share the concern regarding CPI. have a slightly different take on this in that I view the 4% as a hard cap. It's it protects us in a different way in that if there is inflationary pressures or whatnot to compete for the talent that we want, our exposure is limited to that 4% of the public money. So if HNTV or any of our other subs choose to increase pay by 5, 8, 10%, great, we're still only paying 4. So in that respect, we are protecting the public money. If HNTV or whoever still chooses to increase rates on average by 2%, we're only paying 2. So cool.
You are locked into key staff as well, so,
Yeah.
key staff changes require an approval from you guys too, so.
Yeah, so in financial terms, that kind of view it as a but
It's benefit.
yeah, we can parse the exact percentage more, but 4% is industry average, and 4% across private industry is pretty normal from what I've been seeing. In some cases, lower. My opinion is that this is a hard cap, does a okay job of protecting of our budget and health funds.
I think it makes sense on a contract where we have where Mike is with us every day, every week. If it were more of I think the current bridge has a contract for engineering. And I think where you probably have episodes where you're engaging them very, very intensely for a short period of time, like when we had the truck incident. It makes sense to have a longer term contract with maybe something that's tied to more variable rates. But I think in this case, where we know we've made a multi-year commitment to HNTV, and having something that's pretty concrete that we know what the upper end is, I think over that information makes sense. I think on a different type of contract, I think what you're suggesting.
So Mike, you've been on the contract now a couple of years. The first year, did you guys spend the 4%? Second year, 4%? Can you get those numbers for the team? That says even though you could go to 4, first year was whatever it is, 3.5, 3. You didn't hit the cap.
I mean, I'm mindful of adding extra work. I personally don't need that. I was just more about what is the explanation for where 4% came from? And as long as we have that and we're all comfortable with what that is, that's the only thing I see missing. And I agree with the point about the ceiling. I just wanted to be clear on that we weren't it sounds like we're all on the same page that we're locking this in and we're not looking at 26, everything blows through the roof. We don't want to engage in that conversation. That's a risk.
I mean, for us, it's a risk, it's kind of the opposite risk. Our company looks at it and goes, you're locked in for 4% for 2 years, you're locked in, so it's kind of a balance on both sides. They'd rather see us lock in at 7 or 8%, right? But we feel like that was a fair number, so.
I think there's a policy thing that you bring up. And I mean, we talked about what's next. How does the authority evolve? And I think that's a very relevant conversation for that type of, as we start to talk in that vein. I mean, that's what is the future? What does it look like long term? And how does it look 10 years down the road when you look back?
One of the things I would offer up to you all, and we were just looking at this on Friday, is a lot of agencies have a process for how they negotiate contracts for percentages, and it's based on risk. I can't remember the buckets now. We used to do it all the time in Florida, but there's 4 buckets, and it basically says risk. Do you remember what the 4 buckets were now?
Yeah. Basically, they're calculating.
It gives you a range for each one of those. So you take those up and you look at it and you say, okay, this project has low risk, so we're going to go with a 2% on this project, and then an X% based on whatever the other numbers were. But it gives you a formula to develop what you're going to pay on your total. Because so we have overhead, profit, direct salary, right? It kind of gives you that formula to calculate that, and then you can adopt that policy. So we had talked about maybe actually putting that policy in front of you all to say, hey, on your contracts, here's how you may want to calculate profit and overhead on your contract.
Yeah, because like profit is kind of rewarding the risk they are taking. So if they have a like gigantic giant contract that has a lot of risk, they can bring the company down, they request more profit out of it. Simple inspection contract maybe smaller profit. So that kind of calculation is usually maintained and established in the bigger agencies so that they can show everybody that that's why it gave them so much profit out of the contract. And on top of the annual 4% cap, when we actually did a phase 1A contract amendment earlier this year, we had exhibit B1, I think, that has the procedures for how we calculate the actual increase of the staff direct cost. So it's not just the talking amongst in this meeting, it's more like in the contract, we have a procedures and then the guidelines how to calculate the annual increase.
I guess what I took out of that is my fear would be that if you put 4%, then what's the incentive not to go to 4%? And I think you just explained that.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else?
I had one thing. I actually had a reason for bringing up December 6th, which is for a long time, for years, I have been saying the bridge is almost 100 years old. Now you can be entirely free to say it's more than 100 years old. And that, I mean, it sounds silly, but I think that's a real distinction. And feel free to say that. It's a trigger. It's more than 100 years old.
Thank you. That was very germane to the agenda item 9A1.
Oh, I thought you were talking about, I thought we were finishing up the meeting.
No, I'm looking for a motion.
Yeah.
And that's why I was asking, is there anything else?
We already taken the consensus on this, so we're just moving on.
No, we need to. I move to modify the engineering and related services contract with HNTB Corporation for West Hammond Bridge Replacement Project. Contract HRWSBA AE 2024-01.
There's a second.
Second.
Arthur got it.
No, let him just leave it by state.
You wanted to bring up the over 100 years.
I like by state.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? None. Okay, motion carries.
Thank you.
Okay. Informational items. Anything to add? You want to add?
Oh, crud, sorry. That's got me all off.
Okay, it's celebrating internally.
Celebrating at 4%.
Yeah.
He was expecting more negotiations. I think.
I know, let's go find a new job. Register, we talked about, we do have the training starting tomorrow, with HRWSBA. There's 3 days of training, 2 of them on contracting. If there's any last minute, we did try to reach out to all the locals, but if your city or county or somebody has a last minute ad, I think we do have some space. But everybody has given us a response, but if something changes tonight and you want to send somebody, we could probably squeeze another 1 or 2 people in. Ledge Days, I think Dan sent an email out that we're postponing that right now because there's just really nothing new to update them on. So we're going to target more probably January, February, early of next year once we have new information to update them on.
You can tell the bridge is more than 100 years old. That's new.
Jake, tomorrow.
We'll make sure all the meetings.
Or 100 years old. Lead off with that with the Gorge Commission.
All right, so we can beat the 4 o'clock. That was everything.
Wow. Where did the time go? Okay.
Trying to move us along.
Yeah, we're way faster than I thought we would be by now. That's why I'm looking back. Did I miss something? All right. Okay, roundtable. Is there anything else to add from any of the members?
The raise grant, we're gonna have our kickoff meeting the 18th. We're gonna do a pre-planning meeting tomorrow, but that will kick off with the regional partners. It's all exciting.
I'll do one add
That's
when you're
it.
done. On the raise grant for the locals that we will be, for the local agencies that the Bridge Authority needs to contract with for agreements to reimburse them for the raise grant. The board will need to start thinking about that, and that's something that'll be coming to you we're working on drafting those now. And we'll bring the drafts to you, but I think we were looking at Benjamin, White Salmon, and the city of Hood River as the three local agencies. I think it was roughly 150,000 each, somewhere in there, right around that. I think it was 400 split between the three. So just put your other hats on if you're in those cities and how you want to what you want out of that agreement. If it's to fund the position or something like that, just think about that. But that'll also then it's coming back to the board. So there may be different people that have to sit on different sides of those discussions, but I wanted to make sure everybody's aware that that'll be coming pretty soon, probably in January. You'll see those.
Yeah, our target is actually in by January. Or requesting the reimbursement, the grants.
Okay, anything else around the table? I would just say, thank you to everyone who worked on the phase 1B for HNTB. Marlo was 100% correct. Usually that's something that like an executive director would spend all that time working on. And over the last, year and a half, I would be amazed at the number of hours each one of you have put into this new authority. It really is amazing when you think about there's almost as much of many of us working on this project as HNTB has full-time staff working. I know each of you put an innumerable number of hours into this project and learning new things that you didn't know previously. And I just thank you all so much for all your hard work. We're getting there. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, it feels, but we're getting there. So with that, anything else for the good of the order?
Just like to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, be safe. Gonna get a little icy and snowy out there, so take your time.
All right, and
See you next year.
I will just note that our next meeting will be Monday, January 13th, 2025 from 2 to 4. And with that, we close this meeting. Thank you everyone online for continuing to listen in.